members of both private and public universities. When he gets here, like I said, I will let you know and we'll welcome him warmly. Then we have Dr. Rukmini Banerji. He's the CEO of Pratham Education Foundation, and he trained as an economist she trained as an economist in India, where she completed a BA at St. Stephen's College and attended Delhi School of Economics. I feel like a kindred spirit because I have a background in economics before veering off into education. She was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University and later earned her PhD at the University of Chicago in 1991. Now, she joined Pratham in 1996 and has had extensive field experience in schools and communities, as well as implementing large-scale partnerships with governments. She's led Pratham's research and assessment efforts, including the well-known ASA initiative, that's the Annual Status of Education Report from 2005 to 2014. She's originally from Bihar, but she's now based in Delhi. A warm round of applause. I know we can't hear each other, but just give her a warm round of applause wherever you are, and you can give us the reaction. Yes, use your reaction buttons. That's one of the good things about social media, meetings on Zoom. You can use all sorts of reactions to ensure that people still feel warmly welcome. Next, we have another speaker with us today is Mark Nowacki. He hails originally from a small town in Western Massachusetts, and at the ripe age of 12, he was a chess prodigy and taught laboratory techniques to postgraduate students in marine biology. 12, everybody, 12. His first book was published at the age of 16, and the theme was around computer databases. But as it is with life, he veered off that path, and despite starting at Wharton, he ended up with a doctorate in the practical field of medieval philosophy. He subsequently taught at George Washington University and Howard University, but eventually he moved to the Singapore Management University when he found the pull too strong to resist. And he's been there for the last 13 years, teaching happily, researching and publishing in the humanities and social sciences. More importantly, in 2005, he co-founded Locicmills, and that's a school dedicated to teaching 21st century skills through games. We all know that oftentimes we say to ourselves, you want to teach a child something, teach them through play or put a game in their hands, and they will definitely learn that which you want to teach them. Now he focuses full-time on Locicmills, which he believes to be the future of global education. A warm round of applause for Mark, please. Please give him a warm round of applause if you don't mind. Now we have Dr. Miron Bhowmik. He's an assistant professor at the Department of Education Policy and Leadership in the Education University of Hong Kong, and was previously the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Specialist at the Faculty of Education and Human Development, and a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Special Education and Counseling. Prior to joining EDU he was a program officer at the UNESCO Asia and Pacific Regional Bureau for Education in Bangkok, Thailand. He has also worked in the British Council and several universities in Bangladesh. He's particularly interested in the educational policies and practices as they relate to diversity, equity, and inclusion. A warm round of applause for the panelists we have today. Please use your virtual reactions. We're looking forward to those. Like I said, we hope it's a very interactive session today with questions and reactions, both from the panel and from the participants on the call, on Facebook, and even on this particular Zoom call. I find that conversations are usually more beneficial when we engage actively, not passively. So I'm going to encourage us to engage actively with this conversation today, because I'm sure that there's nobody who hasn't faced the challenge of assessing their pupils or their students appropriately at this point in time. I found that one of the most challenging things for us to do when we had to move completely virtual on the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and all the shutdowns and lockdowns and all of that, was how do we ensure that when we're assessing our children, we're actually assessing their abilities and not the abilities of their parents or caregivers? Because the tendency is that when you issue some form of, you think you're using the best form of technology and games and all of that, and you find that the children may not necessarily be doing the homework themselves. They're getting all the help, and then you're asking yourself, how do I ensure that my children actively engage with this work, that they want to do it independently and the assessment results are genuine. That for me was one of the most challenging things this period. And then we had to, like I said, I've been teaching for the past 12 years, so we had to go back to the drawing board. But I wouldn't talk too much about my experience yet. I'll let the other panelists speak. And since, like I said, we're expecting one more panelist later on, but I will move on very quickly to start again. Like I said, please begin to put your questions and answer your questions in the chat box as they come. We will get to them, and we have 20 minutes for the open Q&A session from the participants on the call today. So first, I think I'd like to start with Dr. Rukmini. I know that you have, like I said, you have a background in excuse me, you with your work with Pratham's research and assessment efforts, including the very well-known initiative, I'd like to know, as there's a widespread concern that the learning gap for children in under-resourced communities, and we can't deny it, will continue to widen due to school closures in this pandemic. And we hear that, I mean, most countries are in the second wave. Even in Nigeria now, the second wave has hit us, and they've closed school down and they said we're not going to open until further notice, which means children in underserved communities or under-resourced communities are challenged again. And like I said earlier on, the inequality gap is very glaring now. Now, how can we mitigate or shorten this gap using alternative education practices? With your experience, what do you think we can do as educators, as schools, as not-for-profits, as people in this sector? What can we do to mitigate or shorten this gap using alternative education practices? The gap that we can see is glaringly obvious or is beginning to widen in the wake of this pandemic.
Thank you so much. And it's great to be on a panel with people from all over the world. I'm very curious to see how similar or different our strategies have been in this time. And, while Zoom makes us talk a lot, I think it's also a very good place to actually meet people. So I have a whole category of people I call my COVID friends who have never met. Hopefully I'll meet them someday. But I feel like because you can have these conversations, in many ways we are learning a lot. Hard to condense a day, the experience of the last 9 months into a couple of minutes to explain. But I'd like to just say, a few maybe starting things. As Pratham, we work in, all over India. And I think the first reaction when we had the lockdown, which was sudden and, very, no preparation whatsoever. And when the schools closed, we weren't sure if it's closing just for 1 week or, 2 weeks or, for how long. So there was a great deal of uncertainty about, where this was headed. And so I think the first reaction of everybody within Pratham was exactly like the reaction that we all had, is you pick up the phone, you call your extended family, you call your friends, make sure everyone is okay, both in terms of, learning will come later, but are you healthy? Do you have enough? Are you able to manage? Are you able to cope? And so on. And that's what all our people did. And in a way, I think that was a very good first step because that was an organic step. Teaching and learning is layered onto relationships that people have with each other, students with students, teachers with students, parents with teachers, and so on and so forth. And I think that the first round of just connecting and children who are used to meeting their instructors or teachers on a face-to-face basis, having a phone call from a teacher was very exciting to say that, she's far away, but she cares about me. So one of the first things we learned is that the engagement, the connection is important. Then second thing was, if I was able to phone you, then either I can send you an SMS or a WhatsApp. And we realized very quickly that if we depended only on smartphones and WhatsApp for messages, not even for being connected, for a lesson or whatever, it will limit how many people I can reach. So we quickly moved to saying a combination of SMS messages and a phone call. Because right from the beginning, we could see that being connected to kids was really important. And so if I look at the journey that we've been on, I think first it was just connecting. Then it was connecting to do engaging activities because there was such a, in, April, May, there was such a environment of uncertainty, tension, and stress that we felt it was important for children to be able to do stuff that they enjoyed doing with their hands, with their siblings. And since you were all at home and not able to move around, things that you could do with your parents and other family members as well. So that was a second period of engagement. And then how do you sustain this engagement and what we call staying in touch? And finally, I think we are now beginning to move into, for us and for the children that we work with, which are largely children who go to government schools, the idea of being connected through, online or lessons or all of that was not even a possibility. So it was really, what can you do, which can be a trigger, which can unleash other people doing stuff first at home. And then now as the lockdown kind of, eased up a bit sometime in July, what could you do in your immediate community, which was just outside your house, in your immediate hamlet, and so on and so forth. And then how do you stack these experiences? So it's not just engagement, but it's now beginning to go from engagement to doing things together. We've learned many things. And one of the things we've learned is, I think families have always played a major role. It's just that this pandemic has surfaced who in the family is doing what and what more can be done. Our usual ASER reports are focused very much on the ability to read and to do arithmetic. We don't, in our usual years, get into the dynamics at home. But this year we decided it was important to understand what's going on at home and what's going on in the community and how schools are relating to families. And I think we've learned a lot. And we see that even in families which have very low education among parents, there is a keenness to help because they know that that's the only recourse you have. And maybe later on in the conversation, I can give you some examples of what kind of little SMS activities lead to what kind of activities at home and how this two-way learning process. And I think that in this last 9 months, we've learned a lot from parents. Parents who call you and tell you what they're doing, children who send you back what they're doing, and how you can tailor what this interaction based on the two-way communication. And at some level, I feel our schools are much more rigid. You've got a curriculum for a whole year. It's supposed to move in a linear fashion. You're supposed to be on a certain pace. And if you fall off the ladder, it's kind of your fault. Whereas now I think there's a lot more flexibility going on. And the more you listen to the children and to the parents, the better we are able to connect with each other and move on. So lots to say, but let me stop because you have a lot of other interesting people on the panel.
Thank you very much, Rukmini. Something you said is very critical, and I think it's something that almost anybody on this call can relate to. You said that teaching and learning is layered on relationship, and engagement and connection is very important. Because like you said, before the last 9 months or so, parents would literally just drop their kids off at school and that was it. Do that which you want to do with them. I'm paying you this amount of money, or they don't even, or that's even for the schools that have the resources of parents who are from one category of society. And then you have parents who seemingly didn't know what to do with their children in terms of learning because they themselves didn't have that expertise or that the ability to deliver the curriculum. Because whether we like it or not, this past few months, parents have had and family members have had to help us deliver the curriculum at home. And it's interesting that we've also had to then ask ourselves, the basic math and English that we're teaching our children, or the basic civic education and all of that, is it the be it and end all of life at this point in time? Is it what is extremely crucial? What were some of the things that helped our children or our students and pupils and even our parents wade through the past 9 months? And that brings me to Mark to ask something, because with your experience with 21st century skills, that's something that many of us just tout. We're 21st century skills compliant school, we're 21st century skills compliant organization, we teach 21st century skills and all of that. But I really want to know, Mark, like I said, your work consists of assessing 21st century skills. How exactly should schools begin to teach and assess these skills in the first place? Because we claim that we do it, or some of us don't even claim, They're not even aware that they should be teaching that. They're so focused on the academic aspects. It must be math and English or nothing else. So how should schools begin to assess or begin to teach and then assess these skills in the first place?
Thank you very much, Adeiye. Am I clear enough here? Okay, good. Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. If I had to just answer your question directly, how should we teach it? How should we assess it? The short answer is going to be through activities. It has to be done through experiential learning, experiential assessment. Because at the end of the day, a skill is a form of know-how, not of know-that, which means very clearly that the way that we teach it and the way that we assess it cannot be the same as that we use for assessing facts. But I'd like to take just a little step further back, because that's, it's nice to get the back of the book answer, but there's actually a very straightforward question we have to ask ourselves, which is, good grief, in this time of COVID, why do we want to assess the kids at all, right? I mean, like, why assess? And certain things we already know. We know that there's going to be an academic deficit of some kind, right? Clearly, the kids will have missed some topic or other, or it wasn't covered as clearly or to the same degree of rigor as you would expect in the ordinary classroom environment. But, we as educators know that there are more deficits than just, factual ones, right? I mean, our students, sure, they missed this fact or that fact, and it's useful to assess to know where in the learning content side the students are. But the other deficits, the non-factual ones, memorize like how many, like what's the capital of which country and so on. One of the interesting things, though, would be, well, how about deficits in well-being? Because this is now touching on what our very insightful previous panelist mentioned. It's about families, right? So I think well-being comes in at least 3 different packages that are important for us. There's well-being in terms of psychological well-being. And we know that being cooped up inside is going to be a problem, right? I mean, the kids aren't getting as much exercise, they can't burn up the energy, they're frustrated and so on, right? Sometimes they get a bit depressed, they're disconnected from their friends. All of that's important, right? And then there's the second type of well-being, which is physical well-being. And so there are obvious health issues to be addressed, right? As I said, not much exercise, as well as the obvious public health issues of COVID. But there's a third type of well-being, and this is kind of my area that I work in. And I could say it's the well-being in terms of development, right? It's sort of like a developmental well-being in terms of the particular skills and capacities that the individual learner is growing, developing, consolidating. And I'd like to just make a quick little proposal here, because I think at this juncture, we not only can solve an immediate problem facing us, but also start building in to help all those teachers who are less familiar with 21st century skills. We can actually think about how we could recover and rebound from these deficits, right? So just taking a step back, I would say that, what the students need, we all know what's going to happen. I mean, most of our students are eventually going to go back to school, and their teachers are basically going to just put them through the mill. They are going to be accelerated with respect to the number of facts they need to learn. It's just going to be a lot of pressure on our students. Now, of course, at that point, there should be interventions to help with their psychological well-being and their physical well-being, get good sleep and so on. But we can do something as educators very directly for our students with respect to their developmental well-being, because we could focus on giving the students the tools, the capacities, the skills they need in learning to learn. Because if they learn to learn, then that will make all that game of catch up much easier to play. There'll be less stress on the students. They'll be able to navigate and negotiate the challenging days ahead of them, right? So what we want actually would be assessments that give us a snapshot of where they are in their learning skills, right? But here's kind of the good news. What are these learning skills? Well, happily, and again, I'm kind of happy about this, they pretty much fall within the ambit of 21st century skills, specifically the more cognitive focused skills, okay? I think that we've all done some less cognitive things like communication skills, which I'm sure has had some interesting developments over the zooming influence of the times. But let's take a look at the cognitive skills, right? In particular, I think that what we need are skills that are focused on first absorbing and extending knowledge. So absorb and extend knowledge. So that makes a straightforward learning to learn. And secondly, we want to help the students with regards to making decisions, because the way they organize and structure their time and their lives is going to be exactly what impacts their stress level and their overall ability to learn. Now, if I talk about the first of those, absorbing and extending knowledge, I would say that we have a couple of baskets here. One, we could do something simple like teach the students a few memory techniques and tricks, right? Because they're going to have to remember a lot. I mean, let's just face it, the poor kids are going to have a bit of a stretch there. And the second thing that they need is logic, especially applied logic, because what's going to happen is the students are going to be presented with material and maybe even tests, national exams and things like that, but more immediately, they'll be presented with material that has many elements that they are less familiar with, had less time to absorb. In which case, what they're going to need would be the ability to extrapolate from what they've learned before and draw inferences, or to sort of inductively gather together what they have before them and move to a higher level of generality. Either way, you're talking about skills involved in applied logic. Now, that's my first, absorbing and extending knowledge. The second would be in terms of making decisions, right? This would involve things like goal setting, prioritization, even stuff like SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, cost-benefit analysis. These are simple tools that actually assist with decision-making and help the student understand the trade-offs they're making, understand the decisions they're making with respect to work-life balance, as it were, right? Study-life balance. Now, and I just want to emphasize that at this point, focusing on these learning to learn skills and the assessment of them so we can best address them is really, I think, both immediately geared towards solving our post-COVID problem, as well as being, of course, very much future oriented. It's very much in line with the overall push we all see in terms of long-term development of skills. Because the funny thing is these 21st century skills are both something in school and there's something that is going to be employability skills. So now wrapping it back around to just my short answer to you, how would such an assessment system look? Well, first of all, it wouldn't be self-reporting, right? It wouldn't be like a psych sort of survey, like a psychology survey, where you say how you're feeling or this, that, and the other. That's legitimate in psychology, but that's not going to get you to skills, right? Second, it's not going to be fill in the blank or bubble answers. It's going to have to be experiential. We have to look at, for assessment particularly, how people do things, right? Like playing a game, for instance, right? An easy thing to see is imagine you had to assess, and this is my last thing, I'm going to stop right after this. How would we go about assessing, for instance, if students who come into the beginning of a semester year and they join the soccer team, the football team, and they have not played it ever before, right? And they're just new, it's their first week together as a team, and they have a friendly match with another school, same sort of situation, and the score is 2-2, right? It's a tie. Then you go through the whole year together, you improve and practice lots of skills and drills and all sorts of great things to develop. The students have done this, they face the same school again, and then the score is 2-2. Now, if you look at this like a regular assessment, just on outcomes, frankly, what you've done is you'd have to say there's no improvement. But that's clearly not what's happening here, right? It's not about what they did. It's not about the that of it. Like I got the factual result of 2-2. It's about how they did it. Like how did they pass the ball? How many times did they shoot on goal? How did they go about conducting themselves, right? How skillfully did they manage their time together? So in a nutshell, I would say it's very important now to have activity-based, preferably game-based, in my opinion, assessments that would examine how students do things, how they go about their tasks and the cognitive styles they have. This can serve as a baseline for helping us further tweak the learning to learn skills that they're going to need to acquire. And then maybe about 6 months down the road from when they restart and we've started teaching them this, assess them again on the same axis. So that way we can continually assess how much progress they're making and where they still have deficits. So we'll know where to intervene actively with our interventions. Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm so, as we say in Singapore, it's long-winded, huh? But thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So I hear you that there are a couple of things we need to teach our children to be able to cope in the first place. And our focus should actually, like we said right after Dr. Rukmini, was the focus should be what strategies are we enabling our students and pupils and communities with to cope with this period? How exactly, beyond the curriculum or beyond the curricula, what do we need to do? And that question you asked at the very beginning, I found myself asking that a couple of times this session. You said, why assess in the first place? Why assess? What exactly are we assessing for? What's the purpose of this assessment? And I think that's a very critical question that every educator or school or institution needs to ask themselves at this point in time. Like you said, we know there are learning deficits. We can't run away from that. So are we not wasting, are we spending more time on what we shouldn't be spending an amount of time on now, as opposed to going back to the drawing board to determine what do we want to teach at this period? How do we teach it? And then understand that there's going to be that regular learning deficit of their math and English or whatever it is for a period in time. And then what are the plans to actually close that deficit when we do get back to however normal we can get back to post the pandemic? And so that brings me to Dr. Miron. With your experience in Hong Kong, I have two questions and I'm just going to put them together. The first thing is, so what's the current practice? I mean, we've asked now that why assess? And I know almost every educator, I've asked myself so regularly, but there's only so much you can do within a system. The system says assess. So you literally do not have a choice. You have to assess the children. But what current practices in Hong Kong are addressing learning assessments during this pandemic? That's one question. And then have there been any shifts in assessment strategies that have gone on during the pandemic? If have there been any technological innovations that have been put in place or considered to, or have been considered tools to cause this shift? So that's two questions. What's the current practice now for addressing the learning assessments during this pandemic? And then have there been any shifts in assessment strategies during the pandemic? And have there been any technological innovations that are being considered or have been considered tools to actually advance or cause these shifts in the assessment strategies? Dr. Miron?
Thank you, Adeiye. So I see two questions. So first of all, I just want to thanks Brain University and Next Generation Edu for giving me opportunity to share some of the opinions here today and some of my observation. It's really a great honor to be sitting in this panel. One thing just as a background, I would like to say, I think as it happened in all over the world, actually, like Hong Kong is one of the city where that pandemic sort of hit earliest. So like it was at the end of January, we kind of went on Chinese New Year holidays, and then we never came back as a face-to-face university. So when we came back in few weeks time, we actually became a online university from a traditional brick and mortar university. And then like I think Hong Kong is one of the cities that is facing the most number of waves. I mean, pandemic waves. So at the moment we are having like fourth wave. So it's like continuing since January, and nearly like another January is approaching nearly 1 year. Okay, so working in the university higher education setting, I'm going to share like some of those things that we have been doing in the universities at the beginning, and then later I will be sharing some of the things we have been observing in the school settings, and then like reading here and there, and then learning from colleagues who are working in the school setting. So in the university, well, we have been face-to-face university always, but we had that kind of provision of doing sort of online kind of teaching for about 10 to 20%. But as you can imagine, no one actually was doing that. Like for obvious reason, everyone was doing face-to-face and so on. But there were like the colleagues are always sort of developing online materials and stuff. So on that point, actually there are materials in our hand, but then when the decision was made to become everything, to move everything online, of course, like there are loads of tensions, there are loads of challenges and things are there. But at the same time, the university made sure there are like full support out there. So there was like 24/7 support from our relevant department, like technology and learning support. So that's how kind of we started coping with that kind of situation. And then things like it started happening from asynchronous, moved into synchronous, and then sometimes in between or mix of both. And then things are moving pretty good. And now like we have been doing this for the last 1 year. And I guess like, I mean, every now and then we have been learning all of this from colleagues, and it's still now like we have been doing all of this experience sharing and so on. In terms of assessment, I would say we are in a pretty good situation because most of the assessment we are actually doing online in a way. I'm just going to describe it in a minute. So because ours is a sort of like teacher education major university, and as you can imagine, so most of our like undergrad and postgrad sort of like courses actually require kind of 70 to 80% sort of final assignment submission based, and 20 to 30% sort of group presentation thing. So it's a like combination of both. So what we did, that group presentation happened actually online. And then we found actually it helped, like the kind of collaboration we saw among students, that was like a phenomenon, really. Well, one of the reasons maybe students are not seeing like their peer for some time face to face. So basically they took that opportunity doing work online, and that actually the result came out pretty well. And then we have all this mechanism like peer assessment, self-assessment for that kind of presentation assessment, so that like, you know, there are no freeloader, and, you know, there are students, so like they're assessing them. So it was working pretty well. For the final assessment thing, usually like we have our like learning management platform. Usually students have been like submitting their final assessment through anti-plagiarism sort of software checking thing. So that's been there for long time. So there was not really that kind of huge changes there. Apart from doing that presentation thing online, but there are also some sort of program where, and some courses, there are some like say 20 to 30% sort of like quiz or small test. And then usually that happened to be like happening in face-to-face situation, but now it has to be happening in online situations. So like usually colleagues in the university, they do it within their class time, like using varieties of tools and so on. So more or less, I would say there was not a big shift in doing that. But of course, those colleagues who are like teaching more science, mathematics, that kind of courses where maybe there are some lab involvement and things, they had really kind of some difficult time, and they're trying to sort out, because a few months back, universities are open for face-to-face for some time when they actually prioritize that kind of assessment. One particular area where we saw a major shift in terms of sort of policies and things, that is to do with practical teaching or practice teaching assessment. As you can see, ours is a teacher education university. So basically our students, they have to be in the schools for teaching for sometimes. And in our university, usually that sort of is spent over various years. So it's not really just only one semester. Usually students go to the school like in various semesters, and then we have to also go to schools for sort of assessing them. So since the schools actually moved into sort of homeschooling system or online schooling system, then the major shift has to be made in our own assessment system to assess those student teacher. So in my case, in the last 2 semesters, actually, I had to assess 3 students who are in the student teaching sort of phases. So actually, one of them, I kind of assessed her online teaching. For 2 other students, that was sort of face-to-face assessment. And that was really sort of very interesting experience for me, because the student for whom I assessed her sort of practice teaching, that was for primary 3 class. And she was teaching primary 3 in using online, and then I am assessing her using online. So that was sort of like very, very different experience for me. But also there was a major policy changes happened in our university's assessment system for that, because this is now, we see now for a year, on and off schools are now moving into online, or if the situation permits, they come back to the face-to-face situation. So now our university sort of thinks, or like, I mean, is that right way to think that, I mean, our students have to, student teachers have to have that skill to teach students online. So there is a particular policy changes happened in the assessment system, where we now look at our student teacher, whether they have that ability to conduct an online teaching. Even if they are doing face-to-face teaching, there has to be some element in their teaching that can prove that they have ability to do online teaching. So that's a major sort of changes happened in our assessment system. So more or less that's happening here. Okay, so very quickly in the school system, what we have been hearing or seeing, well, the last stake examination, that is Hong Kong DSA, Diploma in Secondary Education, that happened actually this year in Hong Kong after 1 month delay, because of course last take examination has a huge consequences on students and so on. Hong Kong government and particular authority, they have been doing consultation with everyone, whether they can postpone it or like they can cancel it. But because of the huge consequences on the students, so they finally did it, and it happened, although 1 month later. In the next year, they are also going to do. They have already declared it. Of course, like there are a whole range of hygiene, health measures over there. A little adjustment happened there. So they kind of cut down some of the elements in that high-stake examination. So basically, like there are elements of speaking in the Chinese and English. So what happened? Usually that kind of speaking examination happened like in a kind of panel situation. So that like medical people, health people, they said that might be risky. So they kind of cut down that part. But other than that, there was not many sort of big changes. So that happened. And at the school setting, when schools are back, I mean, they are doing their regular work, but when schools are not open at the moment, schools are not open. So it's happening like homeschooling. But one of the things that came from the previous two sort of panelists today, like, I mean, there is a urgency to work more closely with the parents and family. I think that's happening also in Hong Kong, what we have been seeing. I mean, when we talk to teachers, when we talk to colleagues out in the schools, they say like they have been focusing much and more on that particular aspect. I think I have said much already. I guess I will be talking more about some of the things that actually Mark very rightly said. I mean, about how learning, sort of how to learn. And that's one of the particular things that we have in the higher education setting. A lot that is sort of reflection, reflective writing, and just whole course actually. The assessment of whole course is just based on reflective writing. And then, of course, if time allows, I would really like to share how we do that and how powerful it is. I guess like that might be sort of interest to maybe our audiences. So right now I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Dr. Bhowmik. That was pretty insightful. And I'm glad to hear of the strides that are taking place in Hong Kong. I think reflecting over the last 9 months, I recently got back into grad school and was working full time, and I realized that assessment at that level or at that grade level it's a lot easier to navigate in these times than it is when you begin to talk about preschoolers, children in primary school and secondary school, because there's a measure of dependence on the teacher's support whenever they're in school. So I mean, preschoolers, they learn by observation, they learn through play, they learn through, what's the word now? They learn through repetitive actions, for want of a better phrase. They watch you do it and then they learn. So assessing them in these times, again, maybe because in our minds, when we think assessment, we think tests. And so we all need to move beyond the linear or the linear understanding of assessments as tests. I mean, there are all sorts of formative assessments that we can engage in, but we find that I think, and I don't know how many, if you agree with me, use your reaction, that it's easier to assess in these times people in higher institutions, grad school, and all of that, as opposed to students in primary school, secondary school, and preschool. Am I alone in that thought? I don't think so. I see no hands up. I'm alone. So I'm not alone. Okay, we have our fourth panelist here with us now. And as we warmly welcomed all the other panelists, I'd like us to warmly welcome Professor Fakir with your virtual reactions. A round of applause for him. You're welcome, Professor. And I will go very quickly now to ask the question. The conversation has been very, like I said, has been very insightful from the other three panelists, and I can see all the questions coming in from the participants. Very insightful questions as well. So once Professor Fakir answers this question, we'll go right into that. And then the cafe, the interactive cafe still will take place from about 2:10, where we can still interact with participants and even other members of the panel and ask any question we didn't get to answer on here. So Professor, at Green University of Bangladesh, what alternative strategies are currently being taken, and maybe in higher education generally, to assess whether students are learning? I know I just made a very blanket statement now that it seems easier to assess students in university, higher education level, than it is to assess students at the primary and secondary school level. So are there any alternatives? I'm sure it's still been difficult, but what alternative strategies are being taken currently at Green University of Bangladesh? And then have you or any other members of faculty been running new experiments around assessment to see what works or what will work best, even post the pandemic? And I know that currently there must be some form of blended learning strategies across the university. Do you intend to keep those strategies post the pandemic, or are we going right back to what it was post the pandemic?
Thank you very much, moderator. At the very outset, I would like to seek apology that I was late in joining and I missed some of the discussion from the previous panelists. I was late because I was in another session, chairing another session. That's why I'm late. Based on these questions, I would like to first draw your attention that we need to understand the macro perspective, the bigger picture of Bangladesh in higher education. From March, all the education institutions in Bangladesh, including higher education, were closed down, and education was stopped. And as you know, that in Bangladesh there is a University Grants Commission who basically coordinates all the activities of higher education in Bangladesh. So we need to follow the instruction given by University Grants Commission. But from Green University, when we realized that we may not be able to go for face-to-face education from March onward, we immediately decided that we'd like to train our faculty members, because the face-to-face education, the faculty members were comfortable, but they need to know how they can integrate technology in the course delivery system. So in March, 2 weeks, we devoted our, we have got Center of Excellent Teaching Learning in Green University from 2013. We have been preparing our faculty members for, before they going to teach in the class, they need to go through one full semester of systematic training. And when we provide this training, we also touch a little bit on online teaching, but not holistically. But even then, in March, when the situation was not favorable for us for going to face-to-face teaching, we prepare our faculty member first how to deliver online teaching. Now, regarding question comes, you can course deliver, but at the same time, the issue comes that how we can really assess the learning that they have taken place. Here, we have been waiting for some kind of instruction from the University Grants Commission. The University Grants Commission gives some instruction to the private universities and public universities. What is our thinking, how we can really assess? So we in Green University, we sit together and we basically come out with the ideas that how the learning could be assessed, and then we send it to the University Grants Commission. And you'll be happy to know that many of the suggestions that we gave, some of them they have accepted. So University Grants Commission, they gave suggestion that, well, in order to learning assessment, you can go for quiz test, you can go for assignment, and you can also go for the oral test, what we call biology. But they have made restricted in terms of lab examination that you cannot do it online without face-to-face. So for the time being, they have stopped us not to go for making assessment lab, the courses which are required for lab experiment, laboratory experiment. So after having this formal training for our teachers in online teaching, we from April, first week from April, we started providing online teaching, and we started assessment based on the suggestion that we got from the University Grants Commission. We have been using quiz test, and we'll be using assessment, and we have been also using oral interview. These are the three instruments that we have been using successfully. But while we're going for oral interview, we realized that in particularly in online, oral interview takes a lot of time. And if there is a 30 or 40 students, within the time schedule, you cannot really finish it. It takes a lot of time to really be connected. And as you know, in Bangladesh, we sometimes our students, those are living in Dhaka city, they left Dhaka city during the pandemic situation. They're living in different rural areas. So their connectivity is not stable. And for that purpose, they are also sometimes facing difficulties. So oral interview that we are getting difficulties. And at the same time, if you look into the written assessment, now, because of the system that Bangladesh that practicing from the primary education, secondary education, we are not really preparing our students to be critical thinker. So here, what we found that because of the focus more on rote memorizations, the written assessment, in some cases, we have found that it is being plagiarized. Now, the challenge for us came that how we can really check the plagiarism so that they're not really doing it. That has become a significant problem for us. And of course, later on, we have taken a measure, some software has been developed so that we can check it. But even then, if you cannot really prepare your students, how they can, make references, how they can really paraphrases, and how they can write there by own, it is very difficult to get the appropriate written assessment from there. So here we have taken certain measures how we can really prepare the faculty members in order to really avoid this kind of plagiarism. And making marking on assessment, we again move into rubric systems. So we again trained our faculty members that in order to, when you develop your questions, you need to also share with your students the rubrics so that how much marks they will get for a different section of the answers. So this really also helped us, our students, to come out the problem to some extent, the plagiarism system. So to cut short, what we would say that in Green University, from the very beginning, we are very much careful about that to continue our learning system. So that's why we continued. And you'll be happy to know that from the University Grants Commission, World Bank, they always monitor that who is doing what in online teaching. So according to their finding, Green University becomes the second position in terms of conducting online teaching successfully. So many private universities in Bangladesh, they have been doing this thing, but in terms of making largest number of online teaching courses, it was the Green University who did successfully. And as I mentioned to you, many of the suggestions that we provided to the University Grants Commission, they have accepted the way that we are moving. Not only that, we have also given suggestion that while the lab technician, particularly lab experiment, we should not be stopped. Why not you allow us that we'll take not large number of students, we'll take one by one, and we'll be taking lab experiments, maintaining all kinds of health security measures. And at the very beginning, they were not really listening our suggestions. Now, later on, they have agreed on that, well, you can now proceed to take a lab assessment, but maintaining health measures. So that is the situation over there. Now, coming back to your another issue, as I mentioned to you that Green University developed Center of Excellence Teaching and Learning. And we believe that we should not allow our teacher to go to the classroom, even when the face-to-face teaching was taking place. They need to go through 4 months training program, how to teach. In this situation, when we were delivering this program, we also try to incorporate some of the online facilities. Some of the assessment for the teachers' learning, they were supposed to submit online. So I would not say that we are not prepared that we need to move into online teaching, but even then, we are basically trying to prepare our teachers that there is another way how we can really integrate technology in our course delivery system. To some extent, how we can really take support technology in course delivery. So mentally, we are basically prepared. And at the same time, when we started conducting our online teaching courses, we are also making some kind of survey and assessment to really understand the mindset of the teachers and mindset of the faculty members. Those are basically involved in online teaching. And you'll be happy to know that we made several surveys. And over this survey, we found that in terms of class attendance, during face-to-face situation, the attendance rate of the students is not been reduced. It has been increased in online teaching. And if you look into this grading system, particularly performance assessment system, you basically compare with during the face-to-face teaching and also the online teaching, we found that in terms of maintaining quality, it is almost, to some extent, is improved even in online teaching. And we found that the mindset of the students from the very beginning in the month of April, they were a little bit negative about attending online teaching. There was a mindset among the students and faculty members that COVID-19 will not continue for a longer period of time. We might come back within a short period of time to face-to-face teaching. This mindset really helped them not to prepare at the initial stage to go for complete online teaching. But when it's prolonged, they basically develop their mindset that yes, we need to move into this in the process of online teaching. So later on, we found that they are now stable and they are now willing to even go for the blending teaching. Now we have decided that even when the face-to-face teaching facilities will be there, we'll be moving into some of the courses, blending system. We'll be doing both online and also face-to-face. This is the situation we have. And we have also prepared 12 master facilitators taken from different departments. And the master facilitators are being trained every week that their responsibility is to assist their respective department to prepare other faculty members on a continuing basis. And it is not stopped, it is continuously going on to provide and upgrade the skill of the master facilitators. And master facilitators are basically taking the responsibility of improving the quality of the other faculty members. And it is also taking place in the field of assessment and also in the field of course delivery. So I will stop here, but I will entertain some questions on there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. So three things rather, stood out amongst all the insightful thoughts you shared. One of the things I heard very clearly was the need for continuous teacher training or professional development. At this point in time, there was the need to retrain the teachers on how to actually deliver the curriculum in this mode. And then you've also talked about a model that seems similar to teach the trainer, where you had the master facilitators who may have gone through the process and are a little more experienced in it. And I think that is very key at this point in time because many educators have to retrain themselves at this point in time. We're so used to standing, maybe not in front of a class, but standing or sitting in a physical class, and you can read the body language of your children. You can see so many things outside of the spoken word. But right now we're in front of a screen, that's all we're looking at. And so we're having to retrain ourselves, learn and unlearn a couple of things. And it's interesting to note that like somebody shared in the conversation box around how it's very important for us to keep the blended learning approach, because somebody said to me once that it's COVID-19 now, we don't know what it will be next time. So we can't learn all these strategies now, and then when this particular pandemic is over, throw them away. And then when the next, whatever it is comes, we're struggling again. It may not be us, it may be the generation of people we're teaching who have to deal with it, but then we should be able to give them some sort of playbook or from what they've experienced as students, they should be able to implement something that works at that point in time. So thank you very much, Professor. I will come back, hopefully, if we have time to take some other questions, but right now I'm going to go into the conversation box, and I see that some of our panelists have already started answering the questions. That's very appreciated. I see that a number of the questions have already been addressed, but I would look through now to determine those that haven't been addressed yet. One quick second. So I have a question here that says, excuse me. He says here that there's suddenly a great concern over assessing students' learning during and beyond the pandemic. And this question is open to any of the panelists that would like to answer. So there's certainly great concern over assessing student learning during and beyond the pandemic. But shouldn't we really be assessing ourselves as teachers, schools, and systems in terms of how well we've responded to address the interests and needs of students? As if we did okay, they didn't. Where should the gaze be? How do we assess ourselves? Any thoughts and reactions to this? And this is from somebody watching on Facebook. So I know that Professor Fakir had touched on it a bit, but I would take Dr. Rukmini now. I see her raising her hand. She would like to answer. And it's an interesting question, and I'm looking forward to your response.
So I think that, the point that Mark made about why assess, I think to that, if you add what to assess and how to assess, and really think about that this has been a, in many of our Indian languages, we call there is a word for a comma, which says stop for a minute, a small stop. And in many ways, I think COVID has forced us to stop, think, rethink, and then move ahead. And I think in that rethinking, if I put my point through visually, imagine a blank piece of paper, a white paper, on which there was at one corner of the paper something called a school, which had a very known structure, a building. I think Dr. Bhowmik said bricks and mortar, a gate. And then at the other end of the paper was something we call home, where parents, as you said, Adeiye, that parents will say, here, go to that school. And then when you go to that school, there was a certain way in which that school functioned. There would be, at least in India, a school bell. There would be a blackboard. There would be children sitting in rows and, so on. Teacher at the front of the class, something called a textbook, which took you through from chapter to chapter. And, every month you move to the next chapter and so on. So that was where we were. And mostly our schools worked in that way. But then I think that what has happened in these 9 months is that this shut down, the school shut down, and therefore the children weren't going anywhere. So they were both at home, and then they were kind of just outside the home. They were not in age grade groups. They were in mixed groups. You hung out with your siblings, your friends, and so on. You suddenly found that your grandmother knew quite a bit that she could help you with. And you realized there were many things you didn't know that your grandmother knew. And so all kinds of interactions, which were happening before as well, but happening even more now. And then you looked at, if I look at that space that was between these two, you saw lots of things beginning to happen. Some random, some just, I would put down as scrambling to put together whatever you could, phone, radio, TV, we are saying all kinds of combinations. Not everything works, but a large set of actors who have come onto this stage. So I would say that to me, in this whole period, the interesting thing is that the where of education is now much more flexible. The what, the how are the teachers, this sending of content and curriculum, I think is almost the last thing that we should be concerned about. It is actually, how do you connect, reassess, figure out where you were, talk to each other outside of this age grade curricular frame in which we had been trapped. And whether it's technology or whether it's other ways of reaching out, many, if I was a good cartoonist or animator, I would just there are many connections here. And this also, it's worth saying here that there was a study done in Pakistan some years ago. And of course, if it had been a normal time, the study would have been just an academic study. But as the authors of the study say that because they wrote that paper or it was published soon after the pandemic, the study studied the long-term effects of the Pakistan earthquake. And they found that many of the other indicators, some 4 or 5 years after the earthquake, the livelihood, the income had gone back to pre-earthquake time, but the learning levels hadn't. And the most interesting thing is they attribute the fact that the learning level stayed behind to not to school closure, but to what schools did when schools opened. And I think Mark referred to that soon teachers will put the children through the run of the mill, as he called it. And I think that is the big danger of the pandemic. That is a much bigger danger than the other danger is that all those people who appeared on the cast of characters on my blank page will somehow be told to go back to where they were, and then again the school will take over. I think the school is super important, and it's super important for many reasons. So I think that the point that your questioner raised is that has been a great time of rethinking, and we must go back to some kind of a new paradigm or towards a new paradigm, and not just slide back to business as usual. And therefore, whatever we do at this time, whether it is teaching and learning both for the grown-ups as well as for the kids or for the system, let's keep in mind that the why of education has also changed. It's not just the what and the how. And the why is that you've learned to cope with many things. And I think that, I look around me and almost everybody is different from where they were. And that must be that we've gone in some ways ahead or deeper or higher in trying to cope with a very difficult situation. So I know that a lot of talk is around deficit and crisis, but I think we need to switch that to say we should celebrate that we've all come together in ways that perhaps we were not coming together before. We are all from societies which are deeply divided. That's not a new thing, but hopefully we can come out of this with some of those divisions slightly less, and ways in which those divisions can be bridged slightly more. I didn't answer the question, by the way, but I had to say this.
Thank you, Dr. Rukmini. That was insightful. And I do think you touched on the question pretty well. And I'll share a few thoughts around in response to that question. First, I agree that we must celebrate what we've achieved. It's been a very mentally draining period for almost anybody in the world today, especially educators. I usually tell people that when we had to shut down schools here in Nigeria in March, and it was pretty sudden, my school went on to continue the third term of school virtually. Well, not third term, but we had like a learning program that ran for 3 months. I'm in management position and usually wouldn't teach, but for those 3 months I was teaching virtually. So I would have, on average, I think I was sleeping about 4 to 4.5 hours a day. And I know that that's the story of the average educator at that period, because we were grappling with so much, trying to adapt the curriculum, trying to ensure that, for the average educator, the joy is actually connecting with your class. And so you were looking for ways to ensure that you still connected with your pupils, their parents, and all of that. And so I do agree that it's important we don't lose sight of that, and we celebrate what we've achieved, celebrate the fact that for the first time in a pretty long time, the home and the school have been able to work. There have been fights, I can tell you. There have been fights around, no, we're not doing this, we're tired of sitting in front of the computer, But we've been able to work together and navigate a difficult time at least 75% of the way. And so I think that it's important. There's a saying, I can't remember where I read it, that says, and for an educator to be successful, they must be reflective. So I think that would be Subir. It's important that, yes, we assess ourselves as teachers, as institutions, and as systems in terms of how we're responding. And then to start that assessment, like Dr. Rukmini said, we need to ask ourselves, why? Why do we exist? Why do we do what we do? What exactly is the purpose? When we have our why, then we're able to give an honest assessment of our processes in the first place, which is why I also encourage educators, never stop children, educators and parents generally, never stop children from asking why. They are born with a natural curiosity. Don't take it away from them. That's what is going to help them navigate issues like this when it comes in their own time. Teach them to ask the question why respectfully, but don't stop them from asking why, because if many of us had asked why in many situations, we wouldn't find ourselves in the situations we find ourselves in now. So we have another question, again, open to any panelist. The question says, and it's a very critical question. It says, what is your suggestion for assessing the science students, particularly for lab-based learning? So we have science classes that are supposed to be practical. They're supposed to possibly dissect some form of rodent, or do some experiment with all sorts of chemicals and all of that. How do they engage in those practical activities safely? Because you can say to them, get this chemical, do it to your house, but you don't want something exploding in somebody's face and destroying the whole house. So how do we engage in those practices? And this is from Shahidul Islam from UNESCO. He wants to know how we can actually do the assessment for students, science students, particularly for the lab-based learning part. So any of the panelists would like to share?
May I take this?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. I think in my deliberation, I also mentioned that from our side, we have given some suggestion to the University Grants Commission that even the lab experiment should not be stopped. But what we can do, we can make it, do it, maintaining health measures. So for that purpose, it might take little longer time, and the number of students should be reduced. And for lab experiment, we may take maybe 2 students, 3 students together for one experiment, and making it, for all classes like this. But it requires a lot of intervention from the university authority, and it requires mindset of the students also. But from Bangladesh context, it is problematic because the students might not come only for the lab experiment, because they do not remain present in Dhaka city. How they will come to only for the lab experiment? That is another big issue of not making it happen. But what we did, there are 4th-year students, those who have not, they're supposed to finish their 4-year education. We got permission from the University Grants Commission that you can take lab experiment for the 4th-year students. And we have been doing it, and we are making it successfully. But as I mentioned to you, there is some problem with the students in terms of their availability and staying in Dhaka city for attending lab experiments. So this is a really big issue. Another issue that if you can really do some animation and some the technological support, which might require little investment from the university side, but it will take time, and ultimately we can also go, some of the animation can be done through this for taking the lab experiments. So this is in short what we have been doing and what is our thinking in this area.
May I add to that a little bit? That's very
Yes,
insightful. Okay, thank you. So I completely agree that for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that the materials that are used in a laboratory are not the sort of thing you're going to find around the house, or generally should find around the house. There is an important dimension of being on site. Now, if I look at this kind of bluntly, even in undergraduate education, in the sciences generally, right, I would say, and this is unfortunately the case, by and large, we do not teach students science. We teach them the results of science, right? How to actually do it is something that we generally sweep under the rug. And the younger you are, typically the worse it is for you. So you have to learn all these odd things, right? I know that very often, even if you say like an experiment, one of my favorite stories is my son, when he was younger, well, my older son, when he was younger, went along and performed an experiment in the school. And the difficulty was that he didn't get exactly the results that you're supposed to do ideally. So he just goes up, happily presents it, and says, oh, okay, well, here's what happened, and there you go. And the teacher says, but that's not what you should get. And he said, yeah, but it's science, it's an experiment. And I tried it, and this is what happened. So now I have to figure out why this happened and not something else. And from an assessment standpoint, that was horrifying within my Southeast Asian context, right? Because they want the textbook answer. Coming back around at the university level, for instance, or lower, there's only one place in our classes where typically a student gets to do science as opposed to learning the results of science, and that's in the lab. And frankly, there's no substitute for the concrete experience. This is why, you mentioned my marine biology background. This is why I had to train postgraduate students in lab techniques. I mean, for sure, their knowledge in theory was far beyond mine, but they didn't come up with practical things. Like, so I came up with a stain that allowed you to see rings in a fish's ear and stuff like that, so you can estimate its age and health and things like that. I mean, the hands-on, like how to do it, being able to do something like pour like 0.5 milliliter, the steady hands that are required. The techniques of science are very important. And unless you do it, you will not learn it. I mean, the learning is in the doing. And it's only when you have the consolidated experience that you actually achieve the sort of understanding that allows you to take the next leap and actually do innovative, cutting edge work. So if we want scientists, this is a real problem that the good professor really put his finger on. You have to get the students into the lab. That's the only way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I do agree that there are some things that just can't, well, as of this time, can't be taught virtually or can't be engaged in virtually. And they're attending challenges. But then I usually encourage the teachers I work with that we need to put on our creative hat and find a way around it, or find a way to get them in as healthy a way as possible. It's easier for us because I've been teaching at the primary school level for a while, but at the university level where they actually don't reside in the city, I can understand that that's the problem, that may pose a problem. But we need to keep pushing. We need to keep pushing as educators to find a way around it. Okay, so I have another question here, and it's a very good question. It says, what would be the alternatives for the students of hard to reach area schools, especially in Bangladesh, where they have very limited internet connection? So how do we get those children to actually learn, and how do we actually assess their learning? The hard to reach, and I think this is right in Dr. Rukmini's ballpark. So I'll let her take the question.
I could just say that some experiences from India, one of the things that our governments were able to do, education is part of, especially school education is part of the state governments, is that, by August or so, textbooks had been delivered to villages and to schools. Many different ways in which they did that. Sometimes they delivered it to the village grocery store, sometimes to the school. But I think that the textbook, even though I was saying nasty things about the textbook in my previous comments, but it is a familiar object for even families who are not very educated. So, at least allowing the normal material to get to children was, I think, a very important point. The second thing I think that many of our state governments have been doing is that teachers have been in school, children have not, but teachers have gone back to school, and they're making visits, encouraging firstly parents to come to school, take stuff and go back. And the other way is that teachers have also been making visits to homes. So connectivity, technology, all of these things you cannot deliver very quickly, but some of the old-fashioned things like textbooks and teachers and talking, I think can be done. We have in India, although smartphone penetration is, varies a lot, both by region as well as by the household, but basic phones in some form or the other in households is there in 90% of households. So all failing, teachers calling children, as I told you what we do in Pratham, we call once a week just to find out how we are, what are you doing, what have you been doing, and what can you do? Why don't you open your textbook, look at chapter such and such. Were you able to do that? Things like that, I think, are at least a way to just keep the connections going and keep the energy within the household. But we've seen also some interesting experiments. Radio, which was not used very much other than for sort of entertainment for quite some time, has really come back. And we have seen, for example, we are participating in this radio campaign, which has a radio campaign sort of in the air and an SMS campaign, which goes to everybody's house. And these reinforce each other. And the government, this is in the state of Maharashtra, the government in many districts requested the rural development department to say, can you help to spread the message? So our village councils, we call them panchayats, the head of the panchayat asked the village temples to the mosques to say, can you use your loudspeakers when the radio program is on? So again, I would say that there's been people have done what they could. Some of these have been good ideas, which hopefully will be carried on. And the bad ideas, I think, just die on their own anyway. And so I really feel that while technology is a huge help, I think there is also a tendency to feel that if I have good content and I have a good app, that's going to solve the problem. I think you need a good teacher and a good family to really hold the app or the textbook or whatever it is, to get things going. So my advice to many people is trust the human beings. They usually come through in flexible ways, but connect them and say that it's not just my sending you a good program on, or good content through some kind of technological way, but that I can call you and talk to you and figure out what happened. And so even our USSR survey this year was really to say what's happening in the household, who is doing it, what are they doing, because that's from where you can build what the next step can be.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rukmini, and a huge thank you to every other panelist. We're right around the end of the session, but before we go, I'm going to ask each panelist to just answer the question of this session in 30 seconds, literally 30 seconds. When you see my pen come up, where's my pen? When you see my pen come up like this, it means the 30 seconds is up for you. So I'm going to ask each panelist just to go round in 30 seconds and answer the question that this particular discussion is trying to address, and that is, how can we assess our learners during and beyond the pandemic? A summary of your thoughts on how we can approach this. 30 seconds. I'll start in alphabetical order with, let me see, alphabetical order has failed me. I'll start with Mark. Yes, Mark is first.
Okay. We need to focus on why we're assessing, what we are assessing, and how we're assessing. What we're assessing would be things that are currently academic deficits, but we can take a future-oriented approach. The way that we have to go about assessing this is to divide our usual assessments, which are focused on facts, from those assessments which are going to be focused on know-how or skills. To assess skills, we need to use activities and examine how somebody goes about doing a challenge or a task. The way to do this is simply to, I've developed some stuff that's online, but even in class, you can do this as a teacher. And it works also for teacher training. I'm sorry, I don't actually see you here, so I'd love to be able to stop at the 30-second mark.
Okay, 30-second mark right now. Okay, thank you so much, Mark. Thank you very much. That was very insightful. Now, actually, it was supposed to be Professor. It should have been the professor who had gone first. Like I said, alphabetical order has failed me. So, Professor, can we have you now share 30 seconds your thoughts on how to approach this question in summary?
Thank you very much. I would say that based on our previous experiences, we have developed some idea of what assessment process is really working, what is not. We can take some idea of the tools that we have already practiced and how it really working. We can continue this, but we can also bring some new ideas, what additional things we can do for making effective assessment. But it is true that assessment should be done, but we need to keep in mind that our students are not really used to an online assessment process. So the process should be more sympathetic consideration should be there, but making it more effective. The reflection and the consideration for the learners, it has to be there. So it is not like showing any kind of authority, but it has to be done in a learning mode. That's it, my issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much. I do agree that we need to be sympathetic at this point in time, or empathetic, because it's a learning curve for everybody, students, pupils, teachers alike. So now can we have Dr. Miron, Dr. Bhowmik, that's you, 30 seconds.
Thank you. I'll try my best to complete within 30 seconds. So I just referred to what Dr. Banerjee said about the use of like that feature phone. That's one of the story like I came across in Hong Kong. Actually, teachers are saying in the school, I mean, they're getting students reply by just parents are taking picture with their feature phone and sending it to the teacher by SMS. So that's very much possible. Although it's coming from Hong Kong, the experience, but I guess it's very much possible in that context. Second one, in the university setting, I mean, as I said during my first sharing, I mean, we have been doing many courses just based on reflective writing for the whole course. And there are some online free materials like tools, SOE from Microsoft. You can actually develop all this, I mean, electronic portfolio, putting all the sort of reflection writing. And that's very powerful for developing sort of autonomous learners, for developing self-regulated learning. So that's very, very helpful. The third point I want to say, in this sort of post-COVID-19 assessment, we have been talking about loads of like, I mean, student assessment, deficit, or socio-emotional sort of well-being of students. But we also have to bring on the table the socio-emotional well-being of teachers, our teachers, who have been also having a difficult time in the last 1 year. So that should be very much on the table. So that's my last point. Thank you so much, Adeiye.
Thank you, Dr. Bhowmik. I do agree we need to put front and center the well-being of the teachers who have had to undergo, the period has been highly stressful. So we need to also put that on the front burner and not lose sight of that. So Dr. Banerjee?
So I think that, you know, this whole school's opening is not going to happen like a light switch that we just turn it on and everybody comes to school. It's going to take time to stabilize the whole process. And I think there's a role in that time for the child and the teacher in small groups. Maybe, you know, 4 or 5 children come to the class every day at a certain time. Teacher spends a little bit of time one-on-one with each other. In our assert testing, we actually sit together and the child reads something. The teacher picks up not just the final outcome, which is can he read or can he not read, but all the other things about where they're getting stuck, where are they hesitating, what's the body language and so on. Do a little bit of a math problem, talk it through together so I can see how you're thinking. So I would say that this would be a great way to start the process of going back to school is come, spend 10, 15 minutes with your teacher, connect again, figure out where is the child, what is the level of the child now, does the teacher remember where the child was? And that would be a very good way of planning what kind of things need to be done when everybody comes back.
Thank you for that contribution, Dr. Banerjee. In summary, I would say as educators, you deserve a round of applause. As people in the sector, you deserve a pat on the back. And as I tell my children in class, kiss your brain, because we've had to wade through difficult waters in this last time, in the past couple of months. But in terms of assessment, I think that we're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to let go of some of our must-haves in times past. We're going to really need to understand, like has been shared by almost every panelist here, our why. Why exactly are we teaching students this in the first place? And then why are we assessing this? And then when you're able to determine your why, or you find that there's no why, decide what has to go and what is the barest minimum that has to stay. And then let's not let go of all the things we've learned in this session or in this period by the time things settle down a bit. Thank you. My name is Adeiye, like I said, from Lagos, Nigeria. Proudly a teacher before any other thing. Right now, I'll hand it over to Shakil of Next Gen Edu to wrap us up. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Adeiye. Yeah, and thank you everyone, right? Dr. Bhowmik, Dr. Mark, Nowacki, Dr. Rukmini, and Dr. Samdani for your participation. I think I just wanted to just give a disclaimer that usually after a session like this, I'm sure a lot of thoughts are buzzing in your head, and we usually like to do a cafe afterwards. We usually like to, it's just like, you know, after you watch a play, you want to discuss with your friends, how did the movie go? You want to have that conversation. So, but we're not going to have that cafe today. We will have a community gathering in January next year, in the new year, where we hope to continue this conversation and have a more interactive breakout session on how can we, what sort of strategies, assessments do you want to design, and that can be useful at any time, right? Not, it doesn't have to be the pandemic, but then I think generally, and maybe we can experience some of these alternative assessments during that time as well. So otherwise, I will, please be in touch with us. Like, you can connect with us on our Facebook group, and feel free to email us at nextgenedu241@gmail.com. And I think as an exit, if everyone who's in this room, can you just write down one word or a few words, whatever's on your mind, into the chat, and I'll turn on the music and thank you, and hope Happy New Year, yeah, for that. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
আমরা এখন we can do a little chat. We can stop recording now, I think.
Sure. Yeah.